and welcome to the Early American Brass Band podcast. I'm Chris Triano, joined always by Stephen Canastraci.
Wow, better, more enthusiastic intro. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, we'll put some stadium noise behind it that time.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun.
Some walk-up music.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
This is episode number 9, and in this interview we will be interviewing Mr. Raymond Mase. Ray Mase is from New York City. He's recently retired from the New York City Ballet. He was with the American Brass Quintet for 30 years. He's on faculty as the brass chairman and trumpet professor at Juilliard. So this interview is going to be covering Mr. Mase's experience recording 3 different early American Brass Band albums, as well as some of his thoughts on period brass performance and how that translates to modern music making. So definitely a lot of really interesting stuff in this interview. What a nice guy. He was so awesome to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're finding with all these interviews. All these people are so nice and generous with their time and their experience and their knowledge. We really can't thank everybody enough, but especially Mr. Mase. I mean, this was a great, hour and 45-minute interview.
Really, really cool. I guess along those lines, before we get going, it may already be up by the time of the release of this interview, but we are beginning to release shorter segments of each episode on our YouTube channel. Over there on the Early American Brass Band podcast YouTube channel, you can find segments of each episode that range between 5 to 15 minutes, just kind of shorter little tidbits, easier to digest material. So that's our first round of original separate content that we'll be releasing on there. And we'll also be releasing content that's completely unique to the channel as well. So go over there and check that out. And I think these next few episodes, those tidbit little episode segments that we're uploading are going to contain video of us actually speaking. So you'll get to see us for a change.
That might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Have to change out of my pajamas for once, man.
Yeah.
All right, before we get going with the interview with Mr. Mase, we want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Addressing Gettysburg and the Civil War Digital Digest History Tunes page. Both Addressing Gettysburg podcast and the Digital Digest History Tunes page are both really great resources and are putting out really great content. So we'll provide links to the podcast and the History Tunes page in our show notes, and we encourage you to go check them out. And without further ado, here is our interview with Mr. Ray Mase. Well, thank you, Mr. Raymond Mase, for joining us today on the Early American Brass Band podcast. If we're trying to possibly start a video component on YouTube of this as well, but this is not a good episode to be starting with that because Stephen Canastraci's video is not working. So
no, I'm on my second computer of the day. This is a nightmare.
We're going to have to put a pin in that one for another episode. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I guess we can maybe, if you don't mind, start towards the beginning of when things began for you musically and just kind of go chronologically from there. So if you don't mind, can you give us a little background of when you kind of started playing your instrument and maybe the musical education that you had early on?
Sure. So actually, my dad was an amateur trumpeter, so got me started young. He actually started me playing when I was 5. So I was a little bit ahead of the game, let's say, but as with most young people, maybe it wasn't until 9th, 10th grade around there that I really started feeling, that music would be in my future. And it was then that I started to study. I'm from Connecticut, and we could commute up to the Hart School on Saturdays, and I started getting lessons with a guy named Roger Murtha, who was a longtime faculty member there. And, as with a lot of young people, by the time I was sort of maybe a junior in high school, I knew that I would go on into music. I attended New England Conservatory where I was a student of Armando Gatalla, and got a Bachelor of Music degree there, and very quickly transitioned into professional life. The timing was right, let's say. During my senior year of college, I auditioned for the American Brass Quintet, and was fortunate enough to be invited to join the group. So I kind of went right from Boston right to Aspen, Colorado to start with the group out there. So I was one of those ones who, got lucky and got a job right away. And I did the quintet for 40 years. So it was pretty logical stepwise progression for me. But so music was around. As I said, my dad was an amateur trumpeter. He actually taught the drum corps, one of the drum corps up in Connecticut, and I played in the drum corps for a while and did a lot of different things in high school. I was not in a program where I thought, oh, I'll be an orchestral player. I really played a lot of different things. I played a lot of pop music. I played a lot of gigs, and in some ways, I think that's what attracted me more about the music field than thinking long term about security or a type of job. And maybe coming to New York was a really logical move for me. That the American Brass Quintet was never, it was never a full-time group. It's has concertizing season, but being in New York maybe was ideal because I could do a lot of different things there. And played in orchestras, did some early music. Obviously, I did brass band with the quintet and things. So a lot of diversity, but I think that suited me very well.
So, do you think that it was because of your dad being a musician as well that you were exposed to all those different genres of music that you were talking about, or is that kind of something that you had the bug that sparked your interest on your own?
It's a great question. I think certainly his influence, sort of, just by default, him having been an amateur player, he played club dates. So he was kind of involved in music, but not that seriously. But he exposed me to a lot of different players when I was a kid. I mean, I listened to, Louis Armstrong and Maynard Ferguson and Doc Severinsen and Maurice Andre. But I really, the distinction of, oh, you'll be a classical player, that distinction wasn't made for me when I was a kid. And I never thought about it. I just did what came along. And in high school, I became a busy player. I played a lot of pop music and enjoyed it a lot. It never occurred to me, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Maybe I'm supposed to be a classical player. Never occurred to me. And even when I got to NEC, I still, I wasn't quite as active. I continued to play in a pop music group around Hartford, so I would commute on weekends back to Hartford. Eventually, I stopped playing, more commercial music, but it was, again, a big part of my early training was playing a lot of different stuff.
So you didn't go into NEC with that orchestral frame of mind going in there at any point? No, that's interesting.
Not at all, really. And NEC was interesting. I went to NEC because my teacher, Roger Murtha, really encouraged me to study with Armando Catala. And when I met Catala a summer at Tanglewood, I went up and took a lesson, and I got real excited about studying with him. And a kind of a real bonus with NEC was that Gunther Schuller was the president of the school then, and Gunther was involved in, he's a very diverse musician. It wasn't a strictly orchestral training program there. While I was in NEC, I took up the cornetto, so I learned and Baroque trumpet. Not that I was ever really great at them or anything, but I did play them and got interested in early music. Also got a lot of interest in contemporary music, which Gunther was so involved in. And that interest, when I moved to New York, Schuller helped me. I mean, he got me some things in New York, got me established, and helped through contemporary music and things. So it really, that was without realizing it when I went off to college, I think that environment for me was really a good one and didn't make me, didn't require that I focus exactly on being in an orchestra. And I think it paid off for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you think that diversity and not necessarily being tunnel visioned on a specific career is what allowed you to win the position with the quintet?
Yeah, I mean, let me see. There was a scholarship brass quintet at NEC, which I was lucky enough to become a part of my sophomore year. So I had a lot of brass quintet training, and coming up through high school, I played in all kinds of groups. And I want to say I was just I was an ensemble player. That's what I did. Yeah, I played solos here, there, or whatever, but it wasn't so important to me. The groups that I played in were fun. I liked them. I liked being part of a group, and playing in a brass quintet at NEC was, again, very logical outgrowth of what I had been doing. And I think when the job in the ABQ opened up, Again, I was fortunate to get a chance at it. Maybe you know the name John Swallow, was a very well-known.
Not familiar now.
Well, John Swallow was the tenor trombonist of the New York Brass Quintet,
Okay.
and also played at the New York City Ballet. But John would commute from New York up to NEC and teach. He coached our quintet. And when the opening came along for the ABQ, they weren't necessarily going to have a national audition, and probably weren't going to even audition outside of New York City.
Oh,
But he worked with those guys at the City Ballet, and he mentioned to them that maybe there was this kid from Boston that they might like to hear, and maybe want to give me a shot. So I got lucky that I got a chance to audition for the group, and it obviously I spent 40 years there, so it worked out for me. You know, it was a job I really liked. But again, the group orientation was always important to me. It's I guess it's kind of what made me tick a little bit. I liked being in groups. The quintet ABQ was just a really the right move for me, and I liked everything about it. I mean, as I'm sure you know, with a group, there's so much work to do outside of just the music, and I liked it. I still like it. I still like administration. I have a partially administrative job at Juilliard, being chair of the department. And so it suits me very well. And again, I think for the quintet, having a vision of that a little bit was really helpful to the group too.
Yeah, very cool. I think, Stephen, I don't know if you've heard this story or if it's a myth, I don't even know, but in high school, I remember hearing that the American Brass Quintet, whenever you guys would have an opening, I guess we can put that in quotes, or we're seeking to add another player, a new player, you would hear them play for a little bit, but then spend the rest of the day like hanging out with them and trying to get to know them as a person. Is that actually true?
No, that's really very accurate. What would happen was, we'd hear people play, and usually we'd have them play just a little solo, but the rest of the time playing would be spent with the quintet, playing, predetermined excerpts of quintet repertoire that we'd send out ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And but then we would have a real interview, not quite like hanging out all day.
Oh, okay.
We would have a real interview and had prepared questions. And the ABQ is an interesting group. It obviously continues now as from when I was in it, but I think all along the ABQ was a group where the members saw it as a real priority. Nobody took things that would conflict with the ABQ's concert schedule, and we kind of put it on a pedestal. It was really important to everyone, and fortunately, no one in the group really looked to the group, well, this is how I make my rent. I mean, this is my income. And that was lucky, because I think it meant that we could do what we wanted to do, and we could have the group on the level we wanted it, and not have to think, oh, but we're going to have to be more successful. We're going to have more concerts. We're going to have to, appeal in a different way. Fortunately, it never became a pressure in the group. And when we would audition someone, seeing how the ABQ would fit in their life was really important. You wanted to bring somebody in that would view the group the way we did. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have problems. You try and decide what to do. So got lucky. I think I was amazed over my 40 years. Rarely did we have sort of gut-wrenching arguments or discussions of, the future of the group and why are we doing this and why aren't we doing this. It always seemed pretty natural. This is what we do. This is how we do it, and we'll keep doing that. We all liked what we did, so we were able to keep it at a very high level the whole time.
Yeah, I had heard that story too, or kind of how the audition process went, and it was always used as an example of why everything beyond your playing is super important in how you interact with your colleagues. And for a group that's been around as long as the American Brass Quintet has, I think it really speaks to how important it is that everyone is kind of on the same level and playing out of the same playbook with how they perceive the group. So that's a super important message.
Well, there's no question that when you're out on tour, you spend a couple of hours every day or two playing a concert together, and the rest of the time you're living with these guys. You're spending time together, you're having meals together, you're traveling. Whether it's in a van or whether it's by air, and knowing that you like to be with these people is an important part of the group being successful. I don't know. I've heard certainly some groups, the guys don't maybe get along the same way as we did. And I can't imagine what it would be like. I just, I don't think I would be interested in, I don't think I'd last in a group like that too long. But again, we were always a close group, always a close group of guys, and very focused the same way, musically, artistically. It was great. I mean, I have no, I look back and I say, man, I had a great run, and I'm very happy about that run. Not many people get to do quite what I did. So,
Right.
Definitely. That kind of reminds me, this total irrelevant tangent, but that the magicians Penn and Teller, right? Their relationship is that they don't hang out, they don't talk, they don't do anything outside of their act together, but they don't dislike each other. It's like they just set out to purely have a working relationship, and they don't consider themselves to be like friends with each other. And it's like, I don't know how they would be able, or, well, clearly it's worked for them, unless they're fine, but like, yeah, that type of close interaction and creative process, and being on tour and or now a residency in Las Vegas, how you can have that type of relationship for so long. I don't know, but yeah, it works for them.
Yeah, it's really a great question. I mean, it's funny. So at various times in the group, you'd have different people at different stages of their lives. So when I joined the group, I was 21 years old, but the oldest member of the group at that time was Bob Biddlecombe, who was 21 years older than me, had a wife and 6 kids. Obviously, we didn't hang out like, let's get a beer after rehearsal. He had a lot of different priorities in his life, maybe than I did as a 21-year-old. But the respect and the really getting along well. Bob Biddlecombe is still around, and I speak to him regularly. He just had his 90th birthday. I learned a lot from that guy, and we became very close over the years. We spent a lot of years together in the group, and different generations, but certainly a lot of respect for each other, and we had some great times.
Yeah, definitely. And that relationship is evident in the product that you guys produced, for sure. So, yeah.
Like to think that anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It is.
It's fact.
Yeah.
So, kind of getting us back on track a little bit. The American Brass Quintet, I have down in 1981, put out an album called the Yankee Brass Band. Was this Civil War brass band music an idea that the group kind of came up with together, or is this your idea, or did somebody approach you to do this project? How did American Brass Quintet get affiliated with Civil War brass band music?
No, it's a wonderful question, and actually I think it's pretty good story. It was not a conscious effort, let's do this project. What happened was, back in 1974 and 75, every musical group was sort of trying to explore its own American music past, and we were among those groups too. That we thought, gee, for our concerts we should have something in the bicentennial year. We should have something to play that is American and some kind of brass history. And we looked into it, and as you guys know so well, there's the brass band movement. The mid and late 19th century was a huge part of our brass history in this country, and there might not be any other brass history in this country really to speak of. So, and other groups were looking at that stuff. Empire was looking at the Brass Band Journal and had done some recording of that stuff. I can't remember when the recording came out, but we started looking around. I found some through a musicologist here in New York, a guy named Andre Smith. I found this collection of Hosea Ripley manuscripts in the New York Public Library. It's an incredible thing. There's a couple of hundred pieces copied longhand into a book, which the library actually let us. I did most of them by hand, or many that we did by hand, but they let us even set up a photograph so we could extract them, and I could do it at home and didn't have to sit in the library all day. But we got some music, and so in 1976 we played. So we're still on modern instruments, but during our regular touring concerts, we had a little bit of music to play. But then it kind of got set aside. It was several years later, I was put in touch with a guy named Robert Rosenbaum, who lived north of the city here in Westchester County, who had an extensive musical instrument collection. And one thing led to another. I was in touch with him, and he said, well, come up and check out what I have, So I got interested, went up, played some of the instruments, looked at them. He had some fabulous things. And he was sort of tickled by the idea that I liked the instruments and that we had a group. And he said, well, I remember it. He said something like, well, if you guys wanted to do this, play these instruments, what would you do? What would you want to do? I said, well, I should just take these instruments today and see what happens. He's like, okay, just take them. So, I remember driving down the West Side Highway with 6, over the shoulder and all kinds of valuable instruments in the car, thinking to myself, what am I doing, man? I've got to get these into my apartment. He wrapped some of them in like pillowcases and stuff. I mean, it was wow. Amazing. But shortly thereafter, we sat down and got to playing them. And I sent them, in the days of cassette recorders, I made a little cassette of some brass band stuff that we had played on these instruments. So lo and behold, one thing leads to another. We got in touch with a guy out of Boston who ran a company named Titanic Records. And we did something of, I almost can't remember the title, Music of the Mid-1800s for Brass, something like that, with 6 players. And then that led to playing at the opening of the New American Wing at the Metropolitan Museum. So we did, it's like we weren't saying, oh, we're gonna drive this thing, we're gonna really, move this project forward. Just a new step would happen. We got the instruments, we could play them and play them well enough that we felt we're going to put out a recording. We're going to do this. The Met Museum got interested. We actually borrowed one instrument from them eventually. And then, they're opening the American Wing. What a nice thing to have this group set up in the lobby when people are coming in and playing, old American instruments and American music. So then New World Records got interested and came up with this, well, let's do a real band. Let's do, I guess we used maybe 18 players for that recording. Mm-hmm. And then it snowballed. So then I was in way over my head, so to speak. Okay, we've got to have some people here that really know what's going on. And Bob Sheldon got involved in the project, which was just fantastic. He was such a big influence on kind of keeping us focused straight ahead and making sure that what we were doing in terms of how things might have been done originally and his knowledge of the field, it was great. He was so instrumental in all 3 of those recordings that came out. So we did that recording. After the recording, we played maybe a couple of times on the instruments live. We did a concert at Symphony Space and played with the whole band one time, but that's in Manhattan. It's uptown, like in the 90s. It's not it's not like Tully Hall or a real hall. It's more or less like a community music place, and we played. But we never really, the reality was, could we ever really tour the group, or really not really. We had players that were friends of ours, people that were interested in playing other early instruments, other early brasses and stuff. So we had a nice group and people that wanted to do it, but once we set it aside, we didn't do anything else for almost 20 years. We completely set it aside until Nola Reed Canals from the Moravian Music Foundation down in Winston-Salem got in touch, and we did 2 more CDs. But it's just kind of a real sidebar to the American Brass Quintet in a way, and snowballed and became something bigger than we ever sort of imagined it would. But it went on.
Yeah. In any of those side performances that you guys did when you were on the period instruments and you knew that it was just going to be a performance of that type of music for that purpose, did you ever perform in any type of early American band uniform or anything, or was it always all black, concert black type of thing?
I'm afraid it was all concert black. It was funny. I don't think a lot of times when you're involved in a project, you're not thinking about what's going to happen later or what that it might actually have some significance. You're doing the project, you're doing it, and so you're not necessarily looking down the road like, gee, we should include this, we should make it a broader thing than it is. We just kind of followed our instinct and figured out how to play the horns. And that very first recording, the 1981 recording, we were using some period mouthpieces. Bob Sheldon had a good collection of mouthpieces, which he loaned and we were able to use. But we weren't really, say, oh, authenticity is a huge priority for this project. Mm-hmm. Really, the project was about the music of the of the New England bands. We had some, well, those Ripley pieces. We had some other things that people brought to us, something from the Manchester, New Hampshire band.
Hmm.
So we had a good collection of stuff, and basically as well, let's play these things as well as we can. And so I tried mouthpieces. That particular project, I didn't use a historical mouthpiece. I used something that worked for me. I had a lot of
Hmm.
notes to play. I wanted to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
sure I could do them.
Yeah.
Later, the Moravian music ones, the Salem stuff.
Hmm.
We were more in tune with the idea of we want it to be a little more authentic. We all did use historical mouthpieces on that
Oh, wow.
project, and I searched to find something that I could actually play, and feel like okay, I feel at home on this. But we were I think we were a little more concerned with it than the early project was just a. Here, this was for the for the museum too, and for the opening of the museum, they wanted the project. New World wanted it, so we were kind of we went with the flow on that one, just
Yeah.
the best we could do.
Very
Gotcha.
cool. With that, sorry, go ahead, Steven.
No, I was going to ask how, because you guys started off with six players and then supplemented that group with other players to do the larger ensemble. How did you find? I think you mentioned that some of those players you added were friends and people who were a little bit more involved with that music. But how did you find those other players to supplement the group?
It really wasn't difficult. When I think about the trumpeters that played with us on the first record, Bob Lang played, who was a colleague of mine in the American Symphony,
Hmm.
who I knew as just a great player and would put the time in to learning to play. Lee Soper was another player around New York who had an interest in old instruments. Later, Alan Dean joined us. I'm trying to remember. I know he's certainly on the Winston-Salem ones.
Hmm.
And Alan and I played cornetto together in the New York Cornet and Saxophone Ensemble. So he was very interested in old brass and things. And so we had a really kind of a mix of players. Our tenor trombonist in those days, Ron Bohr, was a sackbut player, interested in old stuff. Bob Biddlecombe, who was the bass trombonist in the ABQ for all those years, played euphonium in one of the service bands before he came to New York. So when he was right out of school, he was in a service band as a euphonium player. So I don't know, it kind of all, it all fit together somehow. We made it go. When we came back to it, though, I remember when we thought about the project, I was a little more careful when we did the ones for the Moravians. For one, I saw the manuscripts, and when I saw the manuscripts, I knew we can't use this music, and somebody has to really do this carefully. Somebody's got to make this work.
Hmm.
So part of putting it together, I said to Nola, who was doing the music, this all needs to be put in the computer. I'm going to we're going to proofread it with a group on modern instruments. Just sit down and read through everything, so we know that when we sit down with the old instruments, we're not saying, "Gee, what's the note in bar 15? Is it a this or that?" So
Yeah.
we
And
really
no
did it right.
excuses on the period horns too.
Right. So we really did it. I made that kind of a stipulation. We have to do it right. I don't want to see us doing this and kind of throwing it together somehow. And she was great. I mean, she put all this stuff in the computer, and the proofreading was very easy. But we would just get together with students and read and see that we had what we needed. And then with the instruments, it's interesting that all the rehearsals for the later project. Everybody clipped a tuner on the bell, so they had their own individual tuner to watch on the music stand, and it was really. I look back and I think that saved us in some ways. We just made everybody just watch your own pitch, and let's just do it that way for a while. I found like in the early recording, probably it just kept. It would ride up, the pitch would start to ride up a little bit, and nobody was keeping it in check. We're playing by ear, the way you should.
Hmm.
But the lack of familiarity with the instruments, I think, led that to go to be more extreme than it would be if we were all playing instruments we played all the time. So for that, again, the later project, using the tuners in rehearsal, you could just see where it was going. You could check it out, and we could stop and okay, everybody check it out. This is where we are. Everybody take an A again. So it was. We used a lot of different things at our disposal for that project, and I think it really helped it. We were better suited for those two recordings than the early one.
So for the two Moravian CDs, you guys were trying to get to A440, or you were just trying to agree on an A that was high?
Yeah, actually, we did try to go to 440. I don't think it was quite like, if the end of a piece, the tuner was coming in at 441 or two or something, nobody was complaining. But it kept that from that idea that of particularly when you're playing the upper register, whether it would start to get sharper and sharper. And again, without the familiarity of playing that instrument a lot, it could get out of control. And I think we really, it really made a difference to keep checking it, we didn't have a huge window to get either of those projects done. It was kind of bring the band together, rehearse for a few days. We brought it in. The ABQ does a class at Juilliard, so we brought the band into the class at Juilliard to play for the class, just to have to do some playing on them in front of people, and then like 2 or 3 days of recording all day, and we'd kind of, well, if we don't get it done in those 2 or 3 days, it's not going to get done because everybody's going to go back to their lives, So there was some pressure with that project to get it, both of those to get it, really done in the time frame that we had. And it was a lot of work, but actually we didn't get in huge trouble in either recording. I didn't feel we were, up against it at the end of the days. We planned it out carefully and we knew what we were doing. And again, I have to shout out, in a way to Bob Sheldon. The second of those recordings was Bob's last playing professionally. And he announced to us he came up to New York. He stayed. We had a place for him to stay, and he was really thrilled to be working. And so the first day of recording, he mentioned, this is going to be my last recording project, or my last playing, publicly. So we had a little party for him after the sessions were over. We surprised him with like a cake, and it was really. I felt really good about that. We were the thing he did last. It was, it was a really nice thing, and he was so great on these. He was, he clearly knew what he was doing and was very careful not to sort of impose his thoughts, but would lend the information we needed when it needed to be. Clearly, he was an expert on the job, but he didn't infringe or anything. I particularly was happy about that. I had a lot of responsibility, kind of leading the sessions and trying to play very difficult parts, and he never sort of, was, pushing on any of that. He knew when to say what he had to say, and it was great. He was really terrific.
So his last playing was for the 2006 second Moravian CD?
That's correct. Yeah, that was it.
So that's cool because our, the second episode that we did for this show was all on the Frederick Fennell's Eastman recording from, 1960. And, we talked a fair bit about Robert Sheldon, his influence, and his facility to even making that album happen with Frederick Fennell. So it's kind of seems like the bookends then with that. Maybe being his first project it was the first band CD that existed of that kind of stuff. So that's the first one, and you guys were the last one for him. That's really cool.
No, it was really cool. And it's funny, the instrument that I played on, that I own, is a Boston E-flat rotary valve, and I was able to buy it. I want to say before the first recording, I was able to secure that instrument, which made a hell of a lot of difference to me. I was able to play it up to the standards I was comfortable with. And one day Bob was looking at it. He said, you ever really look into this instrument? Because it was a presentation instrument for a guy named H.M. Wiley, who was a bandmaster in Peoria, Illinois. I said, well, I've never looked into this. So the next time we were together, the next day or so, Bob comes in. He says, oh, well, I looked into this. There's all this stuff online about him. Here's a picture that I think is probably with the cornet that you have, which the band presented to him. All of a sudden, there was all this history, and I thought, how come I never did that? How come I didn't look at all this? I should have. I just never did. But he was just, he was really into this stuff and came up. He actually sent me some music Wiley had written for the band in Peoria. I have it here somewhere. Oh, wow. Really, it was interesting that there was this, real significant history to this particular instrument.
Yeah. I'm sure knowing ahead of time, or at least when you started recording, that was going to kind of be his last performance that kind of heightened the stakes a little bit more for that last album.
Yeah, he was quiet about it though. It came up. We had started. He didn't say it up front that this was going to be his last project.
Oh, okay.
And we were in the recordings when he brought it up. I remember it because thinking, oh, we've got to do something. We just have to. So, while we're recording, I'm thinking about, okay, I can get a couple of bottles of wine and we'll have some food. And I'm thinking of the party we're going to have when we're all done.
Yeah. What kind of cake should I get?
Almost, yeah. Trying to figure it out. It was great though. It was really nice. Really nice.
Typical musician to be thinking about the reception during the recital, right?
Well, the other one with that project that was really interesting was Juilliard. The dormitory at Juilliard is in the building adjacent to it called the Rose Building, and there are some small places to stay for faculty and things in the Rose Building. So Bob was going to be with us for a week, so I arranged for Bob to stay in the Rose Building, but they didn't have one of these small rooms in the Rose Building. They actually had this suite that they would save for if some, a conductor, some famous conductor was going to be something like that, which was astoundingly beautiful, 4 rooms apartment on the 30th floor of this building or something. So I remember because the first time Bob came up, he maybe stayed with me, slept on my couch. I don't know. It was very informal. But this time, Bob was going to do the class at Juilliard, and we said, well, I've got a place for you. It'll be fine. It'll work out okay. So I took him in the building, and we go up on the elevator in the Rose Building. We enter this suite, and I said, Bob, is this going to be okay? He's looking at me. I said, are you serious? I'm going to stay here for a week. It was like Lincoln Center, New York, for a week. It was very funny. We had a good laugh. It just kind of worked out that way. He had a beautiful place to stay at Lincoln Center for a week during the project.
Yeah, there you go. Man,
wow.
That's a nice, capping off of the of his experience.
Oh yeah,
with that. That's awesome. Nice little cherry on top for him. I'm curious, was that presentation Boston Cornet that you were mentioning? Is that an instrument that was in that first pickup from, was it Rosenbaum you said up in?
No, Rosenbaum had a Fisk E flat that it was a 3 rotary valves, but upright, not sideways, but upright, and what looked like piston valves or piston apparatus to run the rotaries. You know what I'm talking about? And I don't know how to. Yeah. So that, which was a very nice instrument. But the Boston came to me through there was a shop in New York for a short time called the Center for Musical Antiquities. They had a shop on 57th Street, like a real shop. And there was a husband and wife that ran the shop. And I bought a few instruments there. And the Boston, they knew me by then. When the Boston came in, they called right away and said, you might be interested in this instrument. And I went right down and got this. I don't know where it came from before that, no idea, but it came through the shop. And I think, had that instrument not come around, I don't know if I would have been as enthusiastic about moving forward on the projects. I mean, I found an instrument that I could really play, and I thought, well, I'm not going to be the problem. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to, make it go. So
were those Rosenbaum horns ones that were utilized for at least that first recording, or?
Yeah. So we did for the Titanic recording. We used 6 players and used exclusively his instruments. For the second one, by then, which is 3 or 4 years later, many of us had gotten our own instruments by then. I want to say Dave Wakefield got a Boston alto horn that he probably still has. Bob Biddicombe also had an instrument that he bought. I think it might have been a Boston as well. So things were kind of happening a little bit. We were managing to get some instruments. And then once the Met was involved, the Met Museum was involved, their instruments kind of became available to us. Not the ones on display, but they have a huge number of instruments in the basement, all wrapped up. And I was able to go. And we needed a B flat. We needed a tenor horn, and so I spoke to someone there. I had permission that I would be able to go in and look at some horns and pick something out. And I went. So I went in and. The card catalog, there must have been 50 instruments in the basement that all fit the description of what I needed. And someone had already told me, probably Sheldon had already told me, don't look at anything that is, look at only playable shape. Don't, because they have to unwrap these horns. You don't want to spend a day there. You want to, these people have other things to do. So I'm looking through, and I found a maker that I know. I can't even remember who it was, and the instrument was in playable shape. So I asked them to, unwrapped it, and I brought a mouthpiece. I'm a trumpet player, but I brought like a trombone mouthpiece. So I put it in the horn, and I was able to sort of play a few notes enough to know that the instrument worked. It sounded awful, but I played a few notes on it. So the curator there who had unwrapped the instrument, I put it down. I said, "Oh, this is perfect. This is great." He said, "You're not serious," because I sounded so bad. It sounded awful. I said, "No, you don't understand. This isn't my instrument to play. I play trumpet, but I can tell the instrument." I tried to explain it, but it was very funny. I said, "You're not serious,"
Just making sure there were no holes in the thing.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what I was trying to do, but he thought that I was really going to sound like that. So
That's hilarious. Oh man.
Wow.
For those Moravian recordings, did the Moravian Foundation reach out to ABQ to basically I can't find the word to document their musical collection, or did you guys reach out to them wanting to play their music, or how did that one work out?
Yeah, that's so I was a commuting faculty member for the North Carolina School of the Arts for 24 years. From 1977 to 2001, I kind of flew down there every 7 or 10 days and taught at the school. So I knew people there. One of the board members of the Moravian Music Foundation was a guy named Phil Dunnigan, who was a flute faculty member at the School of the Arts. And he knew, we were good friends. He knew what I did, and he probably knew about the brass band recording. But he was the one who encouraged Nola Reed Knaus, who was the director down there, to reach out to us to see about the project. And again, at first I was a little hesitant with the idea that, I was a busy guy in those years, and it wasn't like I had time sitting around. I can take on a big recording project. The quintet was busy, but she reached out to me and we met. I went down. I looked at the original music. That was a good story too. They put on the white gloves to touch the old parts, the music, and I went through trying to figure out what we had and what we didn't have. And after a few minutes, we were in like this vault. I said, everything seems to be in order, but there's no first alto parts to anything. And she said, "Oh yeah, he was captured." So it was like, oh. And actually, I don't know if maybe do know much about that band, but there's a book, a diary of one of the players that documents everything. I got real fascinated with the whole thing. They know so much about the band, the players, where they were during the war, the end of the war for them. It's a fascinating. I want to say the title of the book is a Johnny Reb Band from Salem is the title of the book. But so anyway, she engaged me, and I looked at things, and that's when I said, well, if we're going to do this, this is what I need. I need the music to be copied so nobody's, squinting to read off old parts. It has to be done right. I'm going to need to have the music well in advance so we can read through it and, get a good look at it. I need time. We actually used some of their instruments for that. And they have some Rob Stewart copies when we used, particularly the bass, which I was concerned about, making sure we had a good instrument for John Rojak, the bass trombonist of the quintet, who still is now, was going to play the bass part. So I thought, we've got to make sure that he's got something he's comfortable with, because he's going to be on the bottom. So they sent some instruments up. We borrowed something. I remember getting somebody on the phone and sort of double talking my way to say, one of these calls like, well, you don't know me, but I play in the American Brass Quintet. We're trying to do a brass band recording, and we know that you have an instrument that we could really use if it any way pop. And I go through this whole song and a dance. I get to the end of my spiel, and the guy says, "Sure, where do you want it? Where do I send it?" And I was like, "Oh, great," but I was like begging that we needed this. So anyway, we did it right. We had they really provided what we needed then. So and obviously the connection between me at the School of the Arts was a logical one to move forward with the project. I was down there every week anyway, so I had.
Were there any similar players or instruments from that first recording to the two Moravian recordings?
Oh yeah. So those of us the ABQ guys more or less had our own instruments by then. So we were, and let me see, Kevin Cobb used a B flat that I had, which he wasn't on the first recording. He was only a kid then. So he was on the second one, but I had a couple of B flats for him to play. Lee Soper also played B flat. I think he played on both. Alan Dean, we had another E flat. So there was a lot of continuity from the old recordings, recording to the new recordings. I want to say we used 18 on the first recording, but this recording we used probably 12 brass, like 2 on each of the parts, kind of thing, and a couple of drummers. And fortunately, there was a drummer, the faculty member at the School of the Arts, a guy named John Beck, had been involved with a lot of this playing down there, because there is a current Salem band of some kind that they play these instruments and things. He had played with them, and it was perfect. He knew the tunes, and he knew, the parts are sketchy, and he knew exactly what needed to be done. So we got lucky there that I didn't have to mess with that. He was really on the case for that part of it. So.
Well, I was going to ask, do you guys have any plans for a fourth? Is there anything in the works, or do you think those 3 are going to be the?
I think the short answer is no. There's no plans for a fourth.
Yeah.
And, I'm not really playing anymore. I retired from playing professionally almost a year ago, and I think the group, groups change. The ABQ now they're all very, very sought after players. They all have a lot of careers outside, very significant careers outside of the ABQ. Couple of the group members have young children at home, so it's focusing on the group itself and on what the ABQ does is, the ABQ members have their hands full with doing that now. And I don't think it would take somebody to come along and say, let's do this project. It worked when I was there. I wanted to do the project. And again, I was careful to make sure I wasn't going to overextend myself in doing the project for the Moravians. But when the second one was done, I think I knew this would probably be the last one for me. It took a lot out of me to get the whole thing together, get it done.
Right. Yeah.
Did you ever return to that style of music, 19th century brass band music, recreationally after that recording?
No, I don't think so. We played, so the Moravian music that came around, we did some 5-part versions that we could use out on tour with the quintet, and particularly when we were promoting the records. We've been in the early 2000s. We played some sets of that music on tour, and it was great. We enjoyed doing it, and we're happy to promote the recordings. But I never really played. Let me see. I guess it was the Ken Burns Civil War documentary that's out there somewhere. Some of the music was recorded in the studio on 19th century brasses. I was the cornet player on that project. I think there's a lot of different music on that documentary.
Yeah. My dad plays tuba in that documentary.
Okay, so and I know we just did some in the studio in New York. Not a lot of music, but we did some, and hired basically a freelance group of brass players playing 19th century instruments. So that came along, but that was quite a while ago, many years ago.
Do you remember the music that you recorded for that? Were you in what they called the New American Brass Band for that recording? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Because on that documentary they have the Old Bethpage Brass Band, which my dad played tuba in and was on that recording with, and then the other group was I think Bob Sheldon's. I think it says under the direction of Bob Sheldon, the New American Brass Band. Yeah, and those were the 2 groups that appeared as brass music for the Ken Burns documentary.
Bob may have been up for that, may have come up here. I know we did it in the studio here in the city. It was one day, we just showed up, we read through the stuff and recorded it. It was not we didn't take it home or anything. We just did it. It was a very quick thing. I remember so little about it. I don't even remember when it was. Do you know?
No, it's hilarious that you're saying that, because the second interview that Stephen and I conducted for this podcast, we actually interviewed Dr. Kirby Jolly, who is was the band leader of the Old Bethpage Brass Band, and the group that my dad played with and was my gateway into this music, growing up. And yeah, we asked him the same thing, and we're like, "So, can you tell us about this project?" And he didn't really give us that much of an answer for it. There
Right.
wasn't that much of a story.
Right. He said, "Yeah, we got a call. We went to the city, we recorded, and then we left."
Yeah.
Like that was pretty much it. But I think that documentary came out in 1992, maybe.
Okay.
It
I
was
think.
one or 1990 or 1991, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that would have been in between the first two albums that the ABQ did.
Well, it's
Yeah,
funny
shoot.
that, when you're doing projects, you don't think about, gee, I want to write down what we did. I want to keep track of it. I want to take photos. You go to work, you go do the
Yeah.
job. I remember doing it, but I remember so little about who else was there and how we did it. We just kind of went in and recorded, and that was that. Looking back on it now, I'm sort of sorry I didn't pay more attention or write some of it down, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, it's just one of those things. You do your job, and it's later that you look back and say, "Gee, what did we do? How did we do it? Or who was there?" But
Yeah.
Yeah.
easy to forget about it.
That's funny.
We're fortunate that in the second episode we did that I mentioned earlier, we did a deep dive on Frederick Fennell's Eastman recording on this music, and fortunately, I guess him being a history buff and knowing that that album was significant, being the first of its kind, those liner notes are pretty hefty. And then we also were able to get a hold of a bio discography of all of Frederick Fennell's recordings, and it has like personal anecdotes and memoirs and stuff about each recording, and it's about 3 or 4 pages on just that Civil War recording that we were able to pull some supplemental information from. So
Well, that's great. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I saw on YouTube there was an interview that you did with the guys at Monster Oil, and you had mentioned, or I think there was like a question asked about playing popular music or jazz or something, and you had mentioned that the guys of ABQ stood up and said that they weren't willing to play Scott Joplin rags for a particular performance that they were asking Joplin rags to be performed for. I guess my question is, what difference do you see between Scott Joplin rags and polkas and waltzes during the 1800s?
It's a great question, and I guess I'd say you're not the first person to bring up that particular part of that Monster Oil interview.
I'm sorry.
People always want to talk about that. So, just a little backstory is simply that. So, when the American Brass Quintet was founded in 1960, it actually it was two groups that broke apart at that time, and one group became the Metropolitan Brass Quintet. And they wanted to play a lot of young audience concerts. They wanted to do a lot of informal music stuff. But the American Brass Quintet then became a group that focused on being a concertizing group. That was their mission. That's what the guys wanted to do, and they proceeded to do it. I want to say properly. They began commissioning a lot of new pieces. They looked to the past with the idea of works that were, significant in the brass history, not necessarily exclusively brass pieces, but like Renaissance music, we know that brass instruments were involved in the performance of that music. We have that little sprinkling of 19th century brass music of Ewald and some others. But to make a long story short, the mission of the quintet really was to promote serious brass music, and hopefully with the idea that a group like the American Brass Quintet would be able to be playing on concert stages like the Juilliard String Quartet played, or serious chamber music venues. That never changed. That was what the group was when I joined it, and it's what the group was when I left. What changed was what went on around the group. And Chris Gecker said it better than anyone when we were sort of, I hate to put it this way, but sort of defending who we were at a master class somewhere or something. And he said, the more we stayed the same, the more different we became. And that's because of the rise of a very popular music orientation of brass quintets. And I don't think the American Brass Quintet was ever opposed to that happening, or it simply was not something we were interested in doing as a group and not something we were going to pursue. We were never particularly sensitive about it, except when people would kind of corner us on it, like, well, we should be sensitive about it. We didn't want to be sensitive about it. I know the guys and knew the guys very well in Empire, know the guys in Canadian. these groups did what they felt they wanted to do musically and artistically, and had great runs and continue. Canadian continues to have a great following. Um, we didn't do that. That's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to keep doing what we were doing in terms of, for lack of a better way of putting it, more serious repertoire, pieces being written for us. So that particular incident about the Scott Joplin rags came along where it was our manager who called me and kind of framed it in a way that was kind of like, oh, well, yeah, all right, you don't play that stuff, but of course you're going to do it because, you're going to get a concert out of it. And that kind of touched a nerve with me. I kind of was like, no, that's not what we do. And no, we're not going to do it just to get a concert out of it. It just didn't sit well, and I knew it didn't sit well with the group. And so that idea that we weren't going to play Joplin, it wasn't this sort of line in the sand, that, oh, we're going to uphold this great high ideal. Not at all. It's just we wanted to be who we were, and we wanted to play what we wanted to play. And if that meant we weren't going to play a concert or many concerts, fine. We were going to continue doing what we did.
So it sounds like if somebody came more aggressively at you with this 19th century brass band project, you might have the same response to somebody asking for,
well,
Hosea Ripley music kind of thing.
I mean, it's certainly different in the sense that with the 19th century stuff, we're recreating or trying to represent a slice of American folklore or something like that. And I think it's a wonderful part of American brass history. No problem in doing that. I think it's really makes sense that it somehow gets represented live and by, high-level professional musicians, or let's say really fine performance. Looking now to what's played now, the connection to Scott Joplin by, historical brass players is not really a connection I would make.
It's not there. Yeah.
And again, people, when Canadian was really coming up and and Empire really making a mark in the field, people would, constantly want us to have this kind of be angry about it. We were never really angry about it. I mean, I think sometimes we would be disappointed if we would go somewhere to play and people seemed to not understand what we were trying to do musically, and just wanted to be entertained. I kind of, I didn't enjoy those concerts particularly when it seemed to be much more about the funny guys on stage than it was about the music that we played. And not to have a terrible aside to this, but people hear different things in music, or music represents different things in performance. There is a relationship between the performer and the music. I always felt our group was about representing the music, and the performers were, I don't want to say secondary, but were in the service of the music. I think for a lot of groups, the music serves the performers. The only reason they play the music is because somehow it highlights them as performers. That's not what we did in the American Brass Quintet, and I want to say I'm glad we did. That's not what I or my colleagues played music for. We played music because we loved the music and we wanted to represent that music the best way we could. I don't know that you can do both on a concert really well, because I don't know that audiences can shift gears very well. If you start focusing on what you do as a performer and highlight your skill and virtuosity, I don't know if you can then turn around to an audience and say, okay, listen to this brass quintet by Elliott Carter and listen to the music. I don't know. I mean, it's a question I've asked myself a lot in my career. Can you? And I think we try to do that. And obviously it would vary somehow, or it's difficult to do both. But the music came first, and that's how I see it. And again, representing music of other centuries, brass music of other centuries, seems very natural and correct, let's say, ethical in modern brass performance.
So you saw it more as historical preservation, not so much as you see these quick steps and waltzes as being, quote unquote high art type of thing, like like Beethoven, like.
Yeah, I mean,
Music.
I would say yes. Historical preservation is a good way to look at it. I think it's great stuff. I enjoyed it doing it, and obviously we did it a number of times, and never had never questioned doing it in that. But I'd say yeah, it really was the basis of it for us was representing something from history as best that we could, bringing that to life for our audience or our recordings people to be able to check this stuff out.
Would those three recordings you say be maybe as far as ABQ went in the popular realm?
Um, Well, actually, now you bring that up, we did a recording for Japan Victor that was a little bit more. Actually, there's some Joplin rags on that recording.
Uh oh.
There's some brass band stuff. There's some arrangements of Stephen Foster songs that I did, a variety of things. But um, well, it's an interesting story. We were approached to go to Japan by a really big management there that wanted to do when the first tour we went, it was 3 weeks. We did 18 concerts in 21 days. But to do this tour, they wanted to have this recording of this music and be able to promote this about the group. We had never done it. This may have been 1980 even. We never played that repertoire, but when they came to us saying, we'd like to promote this, it was like, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what it's like. It was also the caveat, once you're established, then you'll be yourself in Japan. You'll be able to come over and play concerts that the American Brass Quintet wants to play. We did the recording. I don't know if it even was released here or whatever. I know it was popular there. We went and did a tour, played a lot of concerts, and we kind of did a mixed program. We did the first half was what we normally would play, and the second half was a little bit lighter. It was fine. I mean, we weren't opposed to playing that. It was different than what we had done. It was a nice tour. The plan was that we would then do a recording of what material we wanted to record in anticipation of a second tour. Didn't quite go that way. Japan Victor was not really interested in the repertoire we wanted to record. They wanted us to do more of what we just did because it was popular and it worked out for them. But we eventually we didn't do it. We didn't do the second recording. We couldn't reach an agreement on what to record. And I remember at one point feeling like I threw my hands up in the air. It's kind of sort of, well, whatever we offered, they reject what it is we really want to do, and they propose something else. Like I remember a brass quintet version of the Nutcracker. This is not what we're going to do. I kept saying, this is not what we're going to do. But they just kept doing it. And after a while, I just kind of got tired and said, no, this relationship is not what we want to do. And we didn't go back for that management for another tour. We've gone for other tours over there, but not for that particular management who clearly wanted us to have a different presence in Japan than what we were willing to have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think you're hitting the nail right on the head that there's a very complex relationship between the music and the performers and the audience and the music and the audience. You can't see me, but I'm drawing a triangle here. And for a chamber music group especially, it takes a lot of thought to kind of determine what you want those relationships to be, and every party involved is going to bring different thoughts and different opinions on that. So it's really interesting to get your take on how that all works and how that flows from one party to another in that triangle.
We could clearly spend a lot of time talking about that very thing, because it was, making what we did something that viable for a broader audience, or feeling like we could play a successful concert where obviously some people would be there knowing exactly who we were and what we did, but some would not. It was sort of trying. I mean, we worked very hard to come up with something that we felt represented us the way we wanted to be represented, but would also be something that, for lack of a better term, an average concert goer could enjoy and like hearing the group. Spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. It's a great topic.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned it earlier, though, that it was liberating for you guys, not being passionate about the group, but then not relying on it to pay the rent kind of thing. So that kind of freed you guys up for that. Whereas I think other groups that might not have been in that specifically like financial situation would, have to acquiesce those types of requests for popularity just to get the check kind of thing.
Yeah, there's no question that, in a group, each individual has their own personal priorities and their own reliance on the group and what the group can provide them. And if it's not at least somewhat consistent from among the members, you're going to have trouble. And I see it with young groups all the time, and I coach a lot of young groups that are trying to make a go of it. And a lot of times what a young group will think is the right approach is to try to be everything to everybody. So anything you want us to play as a young group, we can just do it. We'll play. You want this, we do this. And personally, I often advise those groups and say, that's not the way to go, because you end up with no identity at all. And ultimately, a group with no identity is not going to make a mark in the field, or it's not going to be something that people want to hear.
It's like being a cover band.
A cover band, yeah. And what you want to do is you want to have an identity, and it's hard to establish an identity as a group because people have to agree, and there's very frequently a lot of sacrifice involved in doing that. I remember Meridian Arts Ensemble came up through the ABQ seminar at Juilliard. So we started there in 1987, and they were young players in the school then, and the group started to get formed. And by the early 90s, they were out playing, and they went through a hell of a journey as a group, figuring out who they were and what they did, and then trying to go full time and trying to have a program that would be suitable to play, a lot of community concerts and a lot of concerts for audiences that were not particularly in line with current chamber music trends or with the chamber music field. And ultimately they abandoned that tact, and the guys went on to, they all have good teaching jobs and things, and are able to have the group exist even now as a group that it's what they want it to be. They don't go out and try to play a huge number of concerts, and I think they're happier with the group this way. At least that's my read on it, is that when they were trying to go full time, it was a really difficult thing to do, and very trying, very hard on players to to have to go that way and feel like the feedback you get is not what you want, or it's not representing you a certain way.
Yeah, for sure. Any projects or promotions that you kind of want to let our listeners know about that's going on with you?
Sure. Well, since I retired from my professional playing career some time ago, a few things I'm trying to get done, but nothing has become. I'm not single-minded about anything. For example, I've tried to help the ABQ with the library and getting some parts and scores to pieces that haven't been played in a long time in one place where they're being preserved, and it isn't something where we have to find everyone and do you still have a part for that piece? We don't have to do that. So I've been helping with that a little bit, trying to do that. Just recently, actually, I put out a book of Renaissance duets through BIM. The title is Bicinia, which are, that's the formal name of the two-part music from the Renaissance. It just came out like a couple of weeks ago. It was a project that I've been hoping to do for many years, and finally, actually, one of my students sort of pushed me over the edge a little bit. We were reading some, and it was kind of like, Mr. Mase, why don't you just get this done? It's like, you're right, I got to get it done. So fortunately, Jeremy Mase over there was also, when we talked about it, he was like, you just start sending and I'll get it done. So once I had that push, I got that project done. And maybe some other publishing things are going to come along.
Great. Well,
thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it. I had a
thank
good
you
time,
so much.
It's nice to talk about this stuff and reminisce a little bit on some of the old projects. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks for taking the time to
Sure.
talk with us. Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Mase, for talking to us today. That was a very enlightening interview. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, you can find us wherever you get podcasts, and it would really help the show if you rate, review, and subscribe. That'll help us get boosted up in some search results. We're also on YouTube, where we upload not only the full episodes, but we're also starting to upload some exclusive content, maybe stuff we didn't have time for in a main episode, or excerpts that we thought were particularly interesting. You can find that on our YouTube page. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search Early American Brass Band Podcast. And as always, you can find show notes for each episode on our website. That's eabbpodcast.com. And if you'd like to get in touch with us through good old-fashioned email, our email address is eabb.podcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your suggestions and what you think of the show.
And if you want to write us via snail mail, go ahead and write us a letter, mark the envelope as the Early American Brass Band Podcast, and leave it outside your front door. I'm sure we'll get it in about 2 to 3 weeks, so you can try that as well.
Yeah. Strap it onto your carrier pigeon that you keep in your garage.
Yeah, This episode's featured album is A Storm in the Land. That is the American Brass Quintet's second Early American Brass Band CD. It is their first 26 North Carolina Moravian Band CD. That was the CD that was released in 2002. Again, that middle album of the ABQ's Early American Brass Band repertoire. So we're going to include some notes about that album and that recording project, maybe a picture provided by Mr. Mase if he's able to dig it up on our show notes page. So go over there to eabbpodcast.com to the show notes page and look at our featured album, A Storm in the Land by the American Brass Quintet. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week for episode 10.